Usually when we talk about success, there is this underlying, almost unspoken expectation of permanence.
Right, yeah. Like
Yeah.
it's just always going to be there.
Exactly. We think of success kind of like building a massive physical monument.
Hmm.
You spend your life gathering the materials, you stack the stones, you carve your name into the marble at the base, and, well, you just assume it is going to stand there forever.
Right, because you built it to last.
Yeah.
Or so you think.
Yeah. And we measure our impact by how tall that monument is right now, today, while we're standing right next to it taking a picture.
Which is such a human thing to do.
It really is, but we rarely step back and ask, what happens to that monument 100 years from now?
Does it still stand?
Right, or is it just a pile of mossy rocks that people just kind of walk past without a second glance?
Yeah, totally.
We get so obsessively focused on the building phase of our careers, our families, our projects, that we completely ignore the erosion phase.
We really do.
So welcome to this deep dive. I am incredibly glad you're here with us today because we are stepping into a topic that is going to completely upend our traditional understanding of success, legacy, and what it actually means to lead.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
It is. We are unpacking a framework titled Faithful Leadership in Action, From Disciple to Multiplier.
Yes.
And I want to kick things off right now with the core confronting question that this entire exploration poses directly to you.
It's a tough one.
It really is. It asks, what if the greatest threat to your leadership is not failure, but success that never outlives you?
Wow. Yeah, it forces a complete recalibration of what we're actually doing every day.
Because we spend so much time worrying about failing.
Right, exactly. I mean, you spend an enormous amount of our waking hours just terrified of failing.
Oh, absolutely.
We are terrified of the product launch not working or the small business going under.
Or the community initiative just completely falling apart.
Right. Or frankly, just looking incompetent in front of our peers.
That's the big one.
It is. But the framework we are looking at today suggests that a far more insidious danger is actually succeeding wildly.
Like achieving every metric of visible success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But doing it in a way that is so inextricably tied to your own personal effort that, well, the moment you step away, the entire structure collapses.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I am genuinely excited to dig into these ancient blueprints to extract these timeless leadership nuggets.
There's so much rich material here.
There really is, and our mission for this deep dive is to deconstruct this fundamental difference between a leader who merely produces results, which is categorized here as addition, and a leader who actively reproduces other leaders.
Which is multiplication.
Right, multiplication.
Yeah.
Now, I want to note right up front for you listening, the source material we are pulling these insights from is deeply rooted in biblical examples, ancient narratives, and Christian theology.
Right. It draws heavily on the historical accounts of Scripture.
Yeah. But the leadership mechanics, it outlines concepts like moving from being a bottleneck to building a pipeline. These are universally profound human truths.
Absolutely.
Whether you are trying to build a lasting legacy in a corporate boardroom, a public school classroom, a local community organization, or, even just within your own family structure.
The psychological mechanics of human influence and generational transfer, they operate exactly the same way across all those domains.
They really do. And we are tailoring this entire conversation specifically for you, the listener, who wants to lead and build something meaningful without feeling continuously crushed by the weight of being absolutely indispensable.
Because being indispensable is exhausting.
It is. I mean, let's be honest. It sounds amazing for the ego.
Or sure,
It feels great to be the person with all the answers.
it feeds that need for validation.
Yes, but it is actually a massive trap.
A huge trap. And the ancient narratives are actually the perfect diagnostic tool for a very modern condition. Well, if you look around, modern culture is structurally obsessed with accumulation.
More.
Exactly. We are conditioned to want more output, more reach, more speed, more followers, more revenue.
We want metrics we can display on a dashboard to prove our worth.
Right. But the argument here is that influence without reproduction is a quiet crisis.
A quiet crisis. I like that phrasing.
It's quiet because on the outside, looking at the dashboard, everything looks fantastic.
Right. The numbers are up and to the right.
The crowds are showing up. The output is phenomenally high. But beneath that visible progress lies a severe structural fragility.
It's a house of cards.
It really is. There is an ultimate framing question I want you, the listener, to hold in the back of your mind as we navigate these concepts.
Okay, lay it on us.
If you were forcibly removed from your role today, No 2 weeks notice, no transition period, who would automatically step up and continue what you started.
Ugh, that is a heavy question.
It's the ultimate test of legacy.
Let's start with this first major concept, the quiet crisis, and this battle between the leadership bottleneck and the leadership pipeline.
This is a great place to start.
What is the actual anatomy of a bottleneck?
Well, to understand the bottleneck, look at the physical mechanics of pouring liquid.
Okay, visualizing a bottle right now.
Right. A bottleneck occurs at the top of a vessel where the structure suddenly narrows.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how wide or expansive the base of the bottle is or how much volume it holds.
Because it all has to get through that one tiny opening.
Exactly. The liquid can only exit the bottle at the exact diameter of that narrow neck. All the pressure builds up right there.
And so how does that translate to a human organization?
In a human organization, a bottleneck occurs when all the vision, all the strategic decisions, all the final authority, and all the relational momentum rest entirely on one single person.
Basically, everything has to squeeze through their inbox.
Yes. If every creative pivot has to originate from you, if every internal dispute has to be settled by your intervention, you are the bottleneck.
Even if you're a really efficient bottleneck.
Exactly. You might be a highly caffeinated, incredibly productive bottleneck who works 80 hours a week, but you are still strictly limiting the capacity of the entire system to your own personal biological energy levels.
Man, that is convicting. And the contrast to this is the leadership pipeline, where responsibility is actively distributed.
Right, where new leaders are constantly being developed.
So the pipeline is designed to keep things flowing and expanding outward rather than restricting them to one singular point of failure.
Precisely. But think about the psychological friction here, though. Why do leaders become bottlenecks?
Because they want control.
Yeah, but it is rarely out of malice. It is usually born out of a desire for extreme quality control or out of a deep-seated fear that if they don't touch everything, the standard will drop.
They care too much, almost.
In a weird way, yes.
Yeah.
But this framework highlights a truly tragic historical warning to illustrate what happens when we operate as bottlenecks.
Oh, this is the part from Judges, right?
Yes. It points to a moment in ancient Israel's history, recorded in Judges 2.0.
Okay.
It describes an era right after a massive period of national success and miraculous victories.
Like peak performance era.
Exactly. But then it says that after that great generation of leaders passed away, a new generation arose who did not know the Lord or the work he had done.
That is such a chilling phrase. A whole generation arose who just didn't know.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
And the crucial mechanism to observe there is that this was not a sudden, violent ideological rebellion against the previous generation.
They didn't storm the gates and tear down the statues.
No, it was a gradual, apathetic forgetting. It was a quiet fade.
Wow.
And it happened entirely due to a failure in generational transfer.
So the previous leaders dropped the ball.
Right. The previous leaders, led by Joshua, had experienced miracles, they had achieved massive territorial success, but they failed to intentionally systematize the transfer of that knowledge.
They didn't pass on that deep conviction and that leadership capacity to the people who were literally eating breakfast at their tables.
Exactly. They won the war but lost the future.
That is terrifying for anyone building anything today.
It really is.
It means you can be incredibly historically successful in your own lifetime. You can hit the cover of Forbes. You can take the company public.
Yep.
And yet a single generation later, or in corporate terms, a single CEO cycle later, it is as if you never existed.
Your life's work is just wiped off the board.
All because you didn't pass the baton, you just ran really fast holding it yourself.
That's a great way to put it.
This is where we have to break down the difference between addition and multiplication.
Right, the fundamental math of leadership.
Yeah. Addition is growing linearly. You are gathering followers.
You get one more customer, you hire one more employee.
You get one more subscriber. It is additive.
Exactly.
But multiplication is growing exponentially by training leaders to train other leaders.
And there is a fascinating multiplication scorecard laid out here.
Oh, yes. I love this part. Let's break this down.
So level 1 is followers, level 2 is leaders, and level 3, the highest tier, is multipliers.
Let's look closely at how a person moves through those levels, because the transition points are where most people fail.
For sure. Level 1, having followers, is the default definition of success in our society.
People listen to you, they attend your webinars, they buy your product, they vote for you.
Right. This is good, but it is entirely consumptive. They are consuming your output.
Like an audience at a movie.
Exactly. Level 2, producing leaders, requires a massive shift. This is where people start to take responsibility.
So you delegate a project, they execute it, they help you carry the load.
Yes.
Yeah.
But notice the limitation here.
Mm-hmm.
It still ultimately depends on the original leader's presence to architect the system.
Ah. So you are still the sun, and they are the planets orbiting you.
Exactly. If the sun disappears, the planets scatter.
Which brings us to level 3.
Right. Level 3, producing multipliers, is where the structural integrity becomes permanent.
This is the holy grail.
It is. This is where you are training people who are actively, independently training other people without needing your permission or your oversight.
That is the level where your impact actually detaches from your lifespan.
Yes.
You know, reading through these mechanics, my mind immediately went to a modern scenario. The brilliant startup founder.
Oh, classic example.
Right. Imagine a visionary who starts a tech company in their garage. They are absolute geniuses.
They do everything.
Exactly. They code the minimum viable product themselves. They handle the initial marketing. They know the product inside and out because it literally came from their brain.
Right.
But as the company scales from 5 employees to 50, they simply refuse to let go.
They can't do it.
They demand to be in every product UI meeting. They want to review every piece of code before it ships. They want to personally interview the interns.
And why do they do that? Because they are terrified the quality will drop.
Exactly. And what happens? The founder becomes the ultimate bottleneck.
Yep. They eventually suffocate their own company's growth.
Because the company can only grow as large as the founder's 24-hour day will allow.
Which is a hard biological limit.
Yeah, the backlog grows, the talent gets frustrated and leaves because they aren't trusted, and the company just stalls.
It's a tragedy.
But I have to push back here on behalf of that founder, or really anyone leading a passion project.
Okay, let's hear it.
Isn't it totally natural to want to protect what you built with your own blood, sweat, and tears?
Of course it is.
Like, why is personality-driven leadership so inherently dangerous if it gets you really fast results in the beginning?
That's the tension right there.
Because, let's be honest, a charismatic, dictatorial leader can get a project off the ground infinitely faster than a slow, methodical training committee.
I would argue that personality-driven leadership isn't just natural, it is biologically intoxicating.
Intoxicating.
Yes.
Yeah.
It feeds the ego's deepest desires for relevance and control.
Okay, that's fair.
And you are right. In the short term, it is incredibly efficient. A strong, singular personality attracts attention, inspires fierce loyalty, and creates massive initial momentum.
We see it all the time.
But what's fascinating here is that the underlying argument suggests personality-driven leadership carries a hidden terminal fragility.
Terminal fragility, meaning it's doomed to fail eventually.
Exactly. It structurally rewards visibility over legacy.
Right.
When an entire organization or a church or a political movement is built exclusively on the charisma and magnetism of one individual, what is the contingency plan for human frailty?
There isn't one.
Exactly. What happens when that individual gets sick or burns out or simply retires?
The historical pattern is violently consistent, isn't it?
It is. When a bottleneck leader steps away, confusion, infighting, and rapid decline replace unity and growth.
Because the system was never engineered to sustain itself. It was engineered to sustain the leader's ego.
That is exactly it. The profound psychological shift required here is to realize that replacement is not a loss of power or a threat to your relevance.
It's not a demotion.
No. Training your own replacement is the ultimate fulfillment of your purpose.
I want to pause right here and direct this right into the ear of you, the listener.
Yeah, this is important.
Think deeply about your own life ecosystem right now. Your workplace, your family dynamics, the community group you organize on the weekends.
Ask yourself the hard questions.
Are you building an environment where people are chronically dependent on you, or are they being actively developed by you?
That's the test.
If you took a month-long vacation to a cabin with absolutely no cell service, would the whole operation grind to a halt?
Would people be panicking?
Or would other people naturally step up, make decisions, and keep it moving forward?
It is a really tough mirror to look into.
It really is. Which brings us to a massive pivot point in this framework.
Okay, where are we heading?
Because if we intellectually agree that we need to stop being bottlenecks and start developing other people, we immediately crash into a harsh reality.
Which is?
You cannot reproduce what you haven't become.
Ah, yes. This is the crux of it all.
Before we can change how we lead, we have to fundamentally reconstruct who we are before we ever step onto a stage or accept a title.
Right. This is introduced as the concept of the hidden years and the principle of identity before influence.
Talk to me about identity before influence, because that feels very contrary to modern advice.
Oh, this specific concept is arguably the most countercultural diagnostic in the entire framework.
Really?
Yeah, it demands being before doing.
Okay.
In our highly visible, hyper-connected modern world, we derive our core identity from what we do, right? From our tangible output, from our job title, from our public accomplishments.
Yeah, we are human doings, not human beings.
Exactly. But the ancient pattern presented here reverses that polarity completely.
Yeah, so.
It asserts that deep, lasting leaders are formed in secret, through long, agonizingly boring, often painful seasons of obscurity, long before they are ever granted a public platform.
So influence is the byproduct, not the goal.
Precisely. Influence in this paradigm is strictly the byproduct of a securely formed identity, not the source of it.
If you try to generate influence to create your identity, you will eventually self-destruct.
You will. The foundations just aren't there.
The timelines of the examples used here are just wild when you map them onto modern career trajectory.
They make no sense of modern hiring manager.
Right. Look at Moses. We know him as the guy who parts the Red Sea and delivers a nation from slavery.
A massive historical figure.
But the text points out that he spent 40 years, 4 entire decades, as a nobody shepherd in the backside of a desert wilderness.
40 years.
He was a prince of Egypt, highly educated, and he is reduced to watching sheep for 40 years. Talk about a feeling of wasted potential.
Right, but he had to learn utter dependence before he was ever tasked with leading.
And David, before he was the famous king slaying giants, spent years tending sheep in the middle of nowhere, singing songs to himself, and later hiding in literal caves from a madman.
The obscurity was the training ground.
And the ultimate example given is Jesus.
Yes, this is the most striking one.
He lived 30 years in complete mundane obscurity as a blue-collar carpenter in a tiny backwater village.
30 years of anonymity.
All for just 3 years of public ministry. A 10-to-1 ratio of hidden preparation to public execution.
That ratio is staggering.
It really is.
And to really grasp the psychological weight of that ratio, we have to look at the pivotal moment that transitions Jesus from obscurity to public life.
His baptism.
Yes, found in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 3. The sequence of events here is the key to everything.
The sequence matters.
Huge. Before Jesus has preached a single sermon, before he has healed anyone, before he has gathered even one follower, the narrative notes that the Father speaks from heaven and affirms him.
Saying, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased."
Exactly. Look at the mechanism of that affirmation. He receives total, unconditional validation of his identity and his worth before he produces a single visible result.
Oh, wow.
His identity was absolutely not based on his performance metrics. His subsequent performance flowed out of a completely secure identity.
That is the complete inverse of how we operate today.
Entirely backward.
We work ourselves to the bone, hoping that our performance will finally earn us that voice saying, "I am well pleased with you."
Right, we hustle for our worth.
The framework visualizes this process of internal formation as a soul care pyramid, which I found to be an incredibly helpful mental model.
It's a brilliant visual.
It is built in 4 distinct layers. The very bottom, the massive foundational bedrock, is communion with God, or in a broader sense, the deep, internal, hidden relationship with the transcendent, the grounding of your soul.
Right.
Layer 2, built directly on top of that bedrock, is emotional health.
Crucial.
Layer 3, resting on emotional health, is moral integrity.
Yes.
And finally, sitting at the very tiny top point of the pyramid is leadership output.
Let's break down why the pyramid is structured that way, because the sequence is non-negotiable.
Okay, take us through it.
If you don't have that deep bedrock of communion, of knowing who you are apart from what you do, you cannot process trauma or stress correctly.
Which means your emotional health shatters.
Exactly. And when your emotional health shatters, when you are burned out, isolated, or resentful, you begin to look for coping mechanisms.
Which is exactly where moral integrity cracks.
Bingo. You start making compromises. And once moral integrity cracks, the leadership output at the top becomes a toxic, dangerous force.
It becomes destructive instead of constructive.
Precisely. The catastrophic danger we face today is that most modern leaders flip the pyramid completely upside down.
Oh, I see it.
They balance their entire life, their family, their sanity on the tiny, fragile point of leadership output.
Trying to balance a boulder on a needle.
Exactly. They try to manage massive public influence, huge teams, and complex budgets, without the massive foundation of internal peace, emotional regulation, or moral boundaries to support it.
And eventually gravity wins.
Gravity always wins. The upside-down pyramid tips over and crushes the leader and everyone underneath them.
So how does the listener reconcile this right now?
It's a tough tension to navigate.
Because modern hustle culture absolutely demands instant visibility.
It really does.
If you aren't posting your achievements on LinkedIn, if you aren't constantly curating a personal brand, if you aren't launching a side hustle by age 22, you are told you are falling behind.
The pressure is immense.
Hiding in a desert for 40 years like Moses feels like literal career suicide today.
Totally.
How does a modern leader who has a mortgage to pay and a team to manage reconcile this ancient need for hidden formation with the very real crushing pressure to produce quarterly results today?
Well, what's your take on it?
I was visualizing this tension like building a massive 100-story skyscraper.
Okay, let's hear the analogy.
If you walk past a construction site for a new skyscraper right in the middle of a city, for the first 6 months or even a year, you don't see a building going up.
Right, it's just dirt and noise.
You just see heavy machinery digging a massive, ugly, dirty hole in the ground.
Yep.
To the outside observer or the impatient investor, it looks like they are going backward. It looks like a waste of time.
Where's the ROI, right?
Exactly. But the structural engineers know an absolute law of physics. The taller the building is going to be, the deeper the foundation has to be dug into the bedrock.
You can't cheat physics.
You can't. If you bypass the hole and just slap a 100-story glass tower on top of loose topsoil because you are in a rush to show investors a shiny building, the first time a strong wind blows, the entire tower is going to shear off and collapse.
That is a terrifying visual, but so accurate.
The hidden, unseen foundation is the only thing that makes the visible height survivable.
The mechanism of that skyscraper analogy perfectly explains what the framework calls identity drift.
Identity drift, what is that exactly?
Identity drift is what happens when a leader skips the digging phase.
They skip the hidden years.
Exactly. It is a slow, almost imperceptible physiological and psychological rewiring, where a leader's sense of self-worth slowly detaches from their core, hidden identity and permanently attaches to their visible results.
So it's a gradual shift.
Yes. Let's walk through how that cascade happens. You usually start out leading because you genuinely care about the mission.
Right, you have good intentions. You want to help people.
Exactly. But over time, as you succeed, people start praising you. The results are good, the revenue is up.
And you start believing your own press clippings?
Slowly, subconsciously, you start to believe that you are inherently superior because the results are superior.
Ouch.
You become addicted to the dopamine of the applause, the metrics, the quarterly reports. Your mood is entirely dictated by the spreadsheet.
That seems miserable.
It is. The framework is unequivocally clear on this point. Without deep hidden formation, influence always corrupts the vessel holding it.
Always.
Always. God emphasizes being overdoing because, in the natural order of things, fruit is simply the inevitable result of nature.
Think about an apple tree.
Right. An apple tree doesn't wake up in the morning and stress and strive and hustle to produce an apple.
It doesn't attend a seminar on apple production.
No.
Yeah.
It just produces an apple effortlessly because of what it is at its root level.
That's beautiful.
If the inner life is weak, the outer ministry, the corporate division, or the family structure will eventually collapse under the crushing weight of its own unanchored success.
Okay, so if the foundation of a leader is dug out and built during these hidden years, during this obscurity, what exactly is happening down there in the dirt and the darkness of that hole?
It's not a spa retreat, that's for sure.
Right. How is the concrete of that foundation actually formed? Because it's not just sitting still and waiting.
No, not at all.
This transitions us into a really intense phase of the discussion.
Yes, the crucible.
The framework argues that the foundation isn't just poured passively. It is forged violently under extreme pressure. We are talking about the crucible of character, formation through suffering, delay, and deep disappointment.
This is the point where the ancient text violently collides with our modern sensibilities.
Oh, big time.
We live in a world that views pain, delay, friction, and hardship as bugs in the software of life.
Like they're mistakes.
Right. They are obstacles to be avoided, medicated, or hacked around as quickly as possible. If it hurts, stop doing it. If it is delayed, find a shortcut.
Life hack it.
Exactly. But this biblical blueprint makes it unequivocally clear that hardship is not a detour. It is not a glitch.
It's the point.
Yes, It is not necessarily a sign that you have failed or that God has abandoned you. Hardship is the primary workshop of human formation.
The workshop of formation.
It is the specific tool set used to hollow out a leader so they can hold more weight.
Let's look at the story of Joseph from the book of Genesis because it perfectly maps this out.
A textbook example.
Joseph is a teenager when he gets this grand prophetic dream of leadership. He is promised greatness. He sees his family bowing down to him.
Right, he gets the vision of the end goal.
But the very next thing that happens in his life isn't a promotion to middle management. It is violent betrayal.
A huge drop.
His own brothers, out of jealousy, throw him into a pit and sell him into slavery in a foreign country.
Unimaginable trauma.
He works his way up as a slave, only to be falsely accused of sexual assault, and he is thrown into a dark Egyptian dungeon for years.
It just keeps getting worse for him.
Nothing about his physical circumstances matched the promise he was given in his youth. It looked like a total failure.
Total failure from the outside.
But the narrative reveals that those specific years of agonizing suffering and profound injustice were the exact curriculum required to burn away his youthful arrogance, his entitlement, and to build the immense patience, administrative wisdom, and resilience he would need to eventually govern the entire nation of Egypt and save millions of people from starvation.
Wow.
If he doesn't go to the prison, he doesn't develop the character to handle the palace.
That is perfectly stated. Let's pull another layer of insight from the Apostle Paul.
Okay, let's look at Paul.
Here's a guy who wrote half the New Testament, arguably the most influential multiplier in history.
Huge legacy.
Huge. Yet he writes about having a thorn in the flesh and facing constant crushing pressure, shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonment, betrayals by friends.
The guy suffered immensely.
He really did. And the framework extracts a profound psychological law from these lives. Success without suffering produces staggering pride, but success with suffering produces unbreakable humility.
Unbreakable humility. I love that.
Let's unpack the mechanics of how pain actually expands human capacity.
Yeah, how does that work practically?
Well, when you suffer deeply, your ego is forcibly hollowed out. You realize your own fragility.
You realize you aren't invincible.
Right. And that empty space is then filled with profound empathy for others who are struggling. It builds an enduring patience because you know things take time.
It gives you perspective.
Exactly. It cultivates true wisdom, which is born from failure, not from theory. And it creates utter dependence on something greater than your own intellect.
It is entirely counterintuitive to how we operate. We think if I am suffering, the system is broken.
Right.
But this says suffering is the system. It is the forge.
Forge, yes.
I was thinking about the process of forging a high-carbon steel sword.
Oh, this is a great visual.
You don't just melt metal, pour it into a nice sword-shaped silicone mold, and let it cool on the counter.
No, you'd end up with a very weak sword.
Exactly. If you do that, the metal is incredibly brittle. The moment you strike it against a shield in battle, it will shatter into 1,000 pieces.
It can't take an impact.
Right. To make a sword that can hold a razor edge and actually survive the violence of combat, the blacksmith has to subject it to trauma.
Trauma is the key word.
They heat the steel in a forge until it is glowing white hot, pull it out, and beat it violently with a heavy hammer.
Boom, boom.
They fold it over on itself, heat it again, beat it again, and then suddenly plunge it into freezing cold water to quench it.
The shock to the system.
Yes. The extreme blinding heat, the violent repeated pressure of the hammer, and the sudden shocking trauma of the cold water, that process actually rearranges the molecular structure of the steel.
It changes it from the inside out.
It forces the carbon molecules into a tighter lattice, making the blade incredibly strong and incredibly flexible at the same time.
That's the goal. Strong and flexible.
The framework is telling us that human leaders have to be forged through that exact same molecular rearrangement of heat and pressure.
I love that we are focusing on the mechanism of the forge because it raises a profound theological truth from the source material that completely reframes how we view pain.
Okay, what's the truth?
God sometimes allows pain and delay, not because a leader is failing, but because that leader is being trusted.
Trusted with the pain.
Yes. He is trusting them with the intensity of the forging process, so their character can carry an exponentially heavier weight of glory and responsibility later.
That changes everything.
It does. Suffering violently removes the illusion of control. When you are on the anvil, when you are in the crucible of a failing business or a health crisis, you realize you are not the master of your own destiny.
You are just the metal.
Right. And a leader who has actually suffered leads differently.
How so?
They lead with deep, nuanced compassion instead of harsh binary judgment, because they know what it feels like to be broken.
They have empathy.
Exactly. And when the external pressure of leadership mounts, they don't panic because they have already survived the internal fire.
I want to stop and look you, the listener, right in the eye through the microphone.
Yes, listen to this.
I want you to actively reframe whatever struggle is keeping you awake at night right now.
Think about it right now.
Think about that career delay that is driving you crazy, the promotion you got passed over for, the unfair bureaucratic situation at work, or the personal hardship that feels like it is suffocating your potential.
We all have something.
What if your current frustration isn't a roadblock?
Right.
What if it isn't a glitch in your life plan? What if it is the exact hyper-specific preparation you need to develop the molecular strength required to carry the massive weight of the success you are asking for?
What a reframe.
What if you aren't failing? What if you were just in the forge right now?
Think about the physiological release that comes with that realization.
It's massive.
It changes the entire chemistry of your brain when you view your current pain through the lens of future preparation.
It really does.
It doesn't make the hammer hurt any less, but it gives profound, sustaining meaning to the delay.
It changes everything. Okay, so let's follow the logical progression of the text.
Let's do it.
A leader realizes they are a bottleneck. They agree to step into the hitting years and dig the foundation. They endure the forge, the heat, and the hammer.
They do the hard work.
They have their character tempered. Once that deep character is actually formed, what is the mechanism for transferring it to the next generation?
How do we pass it on?
Right. How do we move from being a singular forged sword to an armory?
I like that.
This brings us to the difference between transactional and relational multiplication, the mentor's edge.
Yes.
The framework insists this transfer absolutely cannot be done by handing a junior employee a PDF operating manual or having them watch a training video.
No, those are just tools.
It requires a deeply inefficient relational process.
And the source material draws a stark, unyielding line in the sand between teaching and mentoring.
Let's define those terms for everyone.
Okay, let's define the terms. Teaching is defined as the transfer of knowledge. Mentoring is defined as the shaping of character.
Knowledge versus character.
Right. Teaching fills the intellect. Mentoring forms the soul.
That's a massive difference.
Huge. The biblical model presented here is exclusively one of life-on-life investment.
Meaning?
It is not about standing on an elevated stage under a spotlight and broadcasting information down to a passive, note-taking audience.
It's not a lecture.
Not at all. It is about extreme proximity, shared daily life, and intimate, unguarded observation.
It points right back to Jesus' operational model.
It does.
He preached to the massive crowds, yes. He fed the 5,000, but he lived with the 12 disciples.
As it be.
He walked dusty roads with them. He ate meals with them. He got visibly frustrated with their thick-headedness.
He was in the mess with them.
The text quotes Mark 3:14, which says, Jesus appointed the 12 that they might be with him.
That is such a crucial phrase.
It is. Presence precedes power. Before he ever gave them the supernatural power to cast out demons or the authority to preach, he just required them to be with him in the mundane moments.
Just being there.
And the framework breaks this mentoring process down into 4 very practical chronological phases of leadership development.
These are so helpful. Let's walk through what these actually look like.
Okay, phase 1 is, I do, you watch. This is pure observation.
Right.
Phase 2, I do, you help. This is participation.
Yeah, and your hand's a little dirty.
Phase 3, you do, I help. This is the transfer of responsibility.
The scary part.
And finally, phase 4, you do, I watch. This is true multiplication.
Let's explore the psychological friction in those phases because they are incredibly difficult to execute in a modern workplace.
They really are. Phase 1 feels so slow.
Exactly. Phase 1, I do, you watch, requires the leader to slow down and narrate their inner monologue.
Yeah.
You have to explain why you are drafting the email a certain way, which feels incredibly tedious.
Because it's faster to just write it yourself.
Always. Phase 2, I do, you help, is the messy middle. The mentee is going to slow you down. They're going to make mistakes.
It requires so much patience.
And then phase 3, you do, I help, requires the leader to swallow their pride and let someone else drive the car while they sit in the passenger seat and resist grabbing the steering wheel.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And phase 4, you do, I watch, is the ultimate ego check. You have to fade into the background.
You become obsolete. In good way.
Right. This 4-phase model is echoed perfectly in the Apostle Paul's strategy. The text frequently references to Timothy 2.2, which is arguably the core architectural thesis statement of this entire framework.
Okay, what does this say?
Paul writes to his mentee, Timothy, and says, "What you have heard from me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also."
Wow, let's count that out.
That is 4 distinct generations of leaders wrapped into one single sentence. Paul to Timothy to faithful men to others.
That is the pipeline fully operational.
It is. The framework provides a contrast table that illuminates this beautifully. Teaching ends the moment the student understands a concept.
Okay.
Mentoring does not end until the mentee can actually replicate the behavior and independently pass it on to a third generation.
I am going to push back here because this is where the theory hits the wall of modern reality.
All right, hit me.
I'm thinking about our listener right now. They are an incredibly busy mid-level manager or a parent of 3 or a nonprofit director running on fumes.
They are exhausted.
They are. Investing this life-on-life time into just 2 or 3 people, spending hours with them, letting them awkwardly shadow your meetings, painstakingly helping them fix their mistakes in phase 3, that sounds horribly, terribly inefficient.
It sounds like a waste of time.
It does. In the age of digital scale, wouldn't it be a far better ROI on my limited time to just broadcast my knowledge to thousands of people at once?
The modern approach.
Right. I could record a masterclass, host a seminar, write a viral thread. Why on earth should I spend 3 years painstakingly forging 3 people when I could reach 3 million people in an afternoon from my laptop?
It's the most logical, rational question of our digital age.
Right.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the actual mechanics of human transformation, we discover a hard truth.
Which is?
Efficiency is the sworn enemy of multiplication.
Whoa! Efficiency is the enemy.
It is. The framework argues that breadth without depth produces mass dependency.
Mass dependency. Explain that.
Think about it. If you broadcast an inspiring masterclass to 3 million people, you might genuinely inspire them.
Sure, they feel motivated.
You might give them a new mental framework or a dopamine hit of motivation. But you have not fundamentally altered their character, you haven't held them accountable to applying the knowledge, and you certainly haven't equipped them to patiently lead others.
They just watched a video.
Exactly. They remain passive consumers of your content. You remain the bottleneck of their inspiration.
So you're just a really big bottleneck.
Precisely. A global bottleneck.
Yeah.
The framework asserts that investing deeply and highly inefficiently in a microscopic fraction of people is the only way to achieve generational design.
Because you can't mentor 3 million people.
No. Mentoring shapes identity, emotional regulation, and calling. Transactional teaching only changes intellectual outputs.
Right.
If you want to change the world, you don't build a bigger stage to shout from. You build a deeper person.
Wow. Efficiency is the enemy of multiplication. That is a jagged pill to swallow, but it makes absolute structural sense when you look at the long game.
It's the only way it works long term.
Okay, so let's say a leader commits. We do the hard and efficient work.
We put in the time.
We endure the awkwardness of the 4 phases. We mentor someone. We invest life on life. But mentoring is intimate. And because it is designed to produce a multiplier, it must eventually come to an end.
The hardest part.
This brings us to what the framework identifies as the absolute hardest, most emotionally agonizing part of leadership, the act of letting go. We are talking about the theology of entrustment and the paradox of release.
This is the moment where the rubber meets the road. All the hidden preparation in the desert, the intense forging on the anvil, the slow, inefficient mentoring through the 4 phases, it all culminates in this singular, terrifying moment of entrustment.
The handoff.
The text looks at the Greek word for entrust, which is paratithemi.
Paratithemi.
Right. This wasn't a religious word. It was a hardcore banking and legal term.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It meant to deposit something of unimaginable value into the hands of someone else, with the strict understanding that it must not be lost or squandered.
You are literally handing over the keys to the vault.
Exactly. And doing this requires intentionally releasing control and fully trusting the mission to the hands of another human being.
Which goes against all our instincts.
It really does. The framework explores the massive psychological tension leaders feel here. The war between security, holding tightly to the reins to ensure everything is done exactly right, and stewardship, empowering others to carry the mission forward, even if they do it differently.
To illustrate how extreme this release needs to be, the text goes back to Jesus' final act of leadership in Matthew 28, often called the Great Commission.
A perfect example of paratithemi.
Jesus is about to physically leave Earth. He gathers the disciples on a mountain and releases them to make disciples of all nations.
He hands over the entire future of the movement.
He does. And what absolutely blew my mind reading this analysis is that the text points out Jesus released them before they seemed fully baked.
That's the crazy part.
The scripture actually includes this raw, honest detail.
Mm.
It says that while they were worshiping him on the mountain, some doubted.
Some doubted at the very end.
Think about that. Some of the very guys he was handing the keys of the kingdom to, the guys who were supposed to conquer the Roman Empire with this message, were standing there still struggling with internal doubt.
It's wild.
And he didn't say, wait, let's do another 6 weeks of training. He released them anyway.
He trusted the process.
Let's dig into the psychological barrier here for us. Control just feels so much safer.
It's a security blanket.
As leaders, we are terrified our mentees will make a mistake that reflects poorly on us. We fear the quality of the product will drop. Or, if we are being brutally honest with ourselves, we fear the loss of our own visibility and importance if someone else is succeeding in our chair.
That psychological barrier is the ultimate boss fight of leadership.
The boss fight, yeah.
Holding on tightly feels like responsible stewardship, but the framework argues it is almost always just fear and ego disguised as wisdom.
Oof.
And the text provides a vital theological counterweight to this fear, the role of the Holy Spirit.
How does that factor in?
In the biblical framework, the reason leaders are able to release clearly imperfect, doubting people is because they are not just abandoning them to their own devices.
Right, they aren't alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are consciously entrusting them to the continuous, corrective completion of the Holy Spirit. The Spirit is the entity that ultimately guides, corrects, and empowers the mentee long after the mentor is gone.
That takes the pressure off the mentor.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, if a leader requires absolute flawless perfection before releasing someone, they are actually demonstrating a profound failure of faith.
Wow.
They are trusting their own micromanagement more than they trust the process.
It makes me think of the universal experience of teaching a child to ride a bicycle.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
And when you first take those training wheels off, you run alongside them, your hand gripping the back of the seat so tightly your knuckles are white.
You're doing all the work.
You are doing all the balancing for them. You are keeping them upright. But you cannot run alongside them forever, bent over, holding the seat.
No, eventually you have to let go.
Exactly. Eventually, if they are ever going to actually experience the freedom of riding, you have to physically open your hand and let go of the seat.
It's terrifying.
And the terrifying, unavoidable truth is they might wobble. They might steer directly into a rose bush.
They probably will.
They might fall on the pavement and scrape their knee. But falling, feeling the gravity, and learning to correct the balance of the bike themselves is the only way they actually learn the internal mechanics of riding.
They have to feel the balance.
You cannot permanently balance the bike for them. The framework makes this brilliant, piercing point. Waiting for perfect readiness unintentionally delays the mission entirely.
It stalls everything out.
If you never let go of the bike seat because you're terrified of a scraped knee, the child never learns to ride, the bike stays in the garage, and the journey stops with you. You prioritized safety over multiplication.
Let's look at the dark side of holding on. The text views the leader, who absolutely refuses to let go of the bike seat, not as a loving protector, but as someone trapped by pride.
Pride, disguised as care.
Exactly. A leader who requires absolute perfection from their team before delegating creates a deeply toxic, paralyzing culture.
Because everyone's just frozen.
Why? Because perfection is a human impossibility. So what you've actually created is a system where no one is ever truly ready, which conveniently justifies your continued dominance as the bottleneck.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. Entrustment is fundamentally an act of courage. It is believing that God can and will work through highly imperfect people, which, by the way, is exactly how he worked through you when you were an imperfect beginner.
We forget that so easily.
We really do. However, the text emphasizes that release should absolutely not be careless abandonment.
Right, you don't just shove them down the hill.
You don't just push the kid down a hill into traffic. Releasing a leader should come with immense clarity of expectations, ongoing background support, vast reservoirs of patience for their inevitable mistakes, clear accountability frameworks, and crucially, it must come with the leader's public blessing.
The public blessing.
A leader must actively, vocally bless their successor in front of the community, signaling to everyone that the transfer of authority is legitimate, joyful, and permanent.
I love that distinction. Releasing with a public blessing, not just handing them a list of tasks and walking away.
Exactly. It transfers the authority.
Okay, but this brings up a very real, very terrifying practical problem for any organization.
All right, that's the problem.
Releasing imperfect people to lead and make decisions sounds incredibly liberating, but it raises a massive red flag regarding quality control.
Oh, absolutely. The mutation problem.
If we hand over the keys, if we open our hands and let go of the bike seat, how do we prevent the core mission, the foundational truth, or the core product from being totally corrupted, watered down, or mutated over multiple generations of new leaders?
It's a huge risk.
This takes us to our final operational dynamic, guarding truth while expanding reach, and the critical necessity of the succession plan.
This is the ultimate existential tension of multiplication.
How to keep the main thing the main thing.
Exactly. How do you scale the reach of the organization by empowering new leaders without diluting the genetic truth of the mission?
What does the text say about that?
The text points directly to the biblical mandate found in Titus 1.9, which instructs leaders that they must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, while simultaneously actively instructing and correcting others.
Firm but active.
Right. The concept here is that doctrine, or the core operating principles of your mission, must act as a deep foundation, not a restrictive fence.
Foundation versus fence. Let's explore that difference.
Okay. A fence is built above ground to keep people trapped inside and restrict their movement.
Like a pen for sheep.
Exactly. But a foundation is dug deep below ground to provide unshakable stability that allows a structure to be built infinitely high and wide without collapsing.
The framework gives a stark warning about the danger of unanchored growth. It maps out two ways to fail here.
Let's hear them.
First, truth without growth is just stagnation. You have a perfectly pure, doctrinally flawless museum exhibit that is completely irrelevant because no one ever visits it.
Right. It's safe but dead.
But on the flip side, growth without truth leads to total structural instability.
It collapses.
You build a massive viral following, you open 100 franchise locations, but the core identity and quality are completely lost. And the whole thing eventually splinters or collapses under scandal or poor management.
We see that happen all the time with fast-growing companies.
It uses the succession of Moses handing power to Joshua as the prime historical example of doing it right.
The gold standard of succession.
This transition wasn't a panicked, rushed, single event on Moses' deathbed where he just tossed the keys to Joshua and croaked, "Good luck, figure it out."
No, it was highly intentional.
It was a deliberate process spanning years. Joshua observed Moses closely. He was mentored through the 4 phases. He was tested in battle. And finally, he was publicly ceremonially affirmed by Moses in front of the entire nation before Moses departed.
The public blessing we talked about.
So I have to ask you, how do we practically maintain this delicate balance today? Because in modern organizations, scaling up almost always means watering down the quality.
It's the franchise paradox.
Think of a beloved local restaurant that franchises nationally. The food almost always gets worse. How do we prevent a multiplied error?
This raises an important question about culture. To prevent a multiplied error, you have to shift the culture at a genetic level.
How do you do that?
The framework argues that multiplication must become the cultural DNA of the organization, not just a one-off HR event or a leadership seminar you run once a year.
It has to be everyday life.
Exactly. This means establishing clear, non-negotiable behavioral norms. It means creating shared leadership structures where power isn't hoarded by one central hub.
Getting rid of the bottleneck.
Right. And fundamentally, it means changing how the organization measures its ultimate success. You have to stop measuring success exclusively by attendance, output, or quarterly revenue, and start measuring it by reproduction.
By how many new leaders you make.
Yes. How many new, capable, healthy leaders are we generating this year? Because you are exactly right. A multiplied error is the most dangerous thing on earth.
A bad seed multiply.
If you take a toxic leader or a bad process and multiply it, you don't just get a bad team. You create chaos at scale. You weaponize dysfunction.
Wow. Weaponized dysfunction.
This is exactly why the text insists relentlessly that character and doctrinal integrity must be prioritized long before competence or charisma.
Character first, always.
You must ensure the inner life, the emotional health, and the core beliefs of the leader are completely solid before you ever give them the platform and the power to multiply themselves.
That makes total sense.
Succession, in this view, isn't a tragic, melancholy event where an old leader slowly fades away into irrelevance.
It's not a funeral.
No. Succession is the ultimate triumphant crowning act of multiplying leadership.
Mhm.
It is the proof that the pipeline works.
Okay, let's bring all these complex threads together. We've covered an incredible amount of ground today, tracing the entire life cycle of a multiplier.
We really have.
We started by confronting the quiet crisis, looking in the mirror at the immense danger of being a bottleneck leader, trapped in the exhausting linear cycle of mere addition.
The exhaustion of doing it all yourself.
We explored the absolute necessity of the hidden years, that dark, quiet, frustrating time where the deep foundation of our identity is dug out so we don't suffer from catastrophic identity drift when the spotlight finally hits us.
The digging phase.
We walked through the intense, painful crucible of character formation, realizing that our current suffering and delay aren't glitches in the system, but the very forge where the molecular strength of a multiplier is hammered out.
Changing the structure of the steel.
We looked at the demanding, wildly inefficient, life-on-life phases of mentorship, moving past the ease of broadcasting into the messy, relational work of transformation.
Efficiency is the enemy.
We faced the terrifying paradox of entrustment, the absolute necessity of opening our hands, releasing control, and letting the people we lead wobble on the bike.
Letting them feel the balance.
And finally, we discuss the solemn duty to guard the core truth by building a deep foundation, ensuring that as our reach expands outward, our structural integrity doesn't fracture.
Keeping the DNA pure.
The entire ancient framework we study today reminds us of one piercing truth. True legacy is not measured by the concrete monuments you build, the revenue you generate, or the fancy titles you hold.
None of that lasts.
It is measured entirely and exclusively by the people you empower and release.
It requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view humanity.
Absolutely.
It forces a leader to stop looking at the people around them as useful tools to achieve a grand vision, and to realize that the people themselves are the vision.
The people are the vision.
Building the people is the entire point of the mission.
I love that. The people are the mission. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you close this app and go about your day.
Think on this one.
We started this conversation by talking about monuments and that deep-seated human desire to build something with our name carved into it that lasts forever.
The desire to be remembered.
We all want to be remembered. But if the true measure of your leadership is what happens after you are gone, after you leave the room, is it possible that your greatest, most profoundly successful life achievement will be something you are completely forgotten for?
That's a beautiful thought.
Imagine building a legacy so deeply woven into the lives, habits, and character of others, a culture of empowerment so seamless that the people who come after you genuinely think they did it all themselves.
Because you trained them so well.
They might not even know your name because your influence has simply become the invisible air they breathe. Are you brave enough to build an absolute masterpiece of a legacy and intentionally leave your signature off the canvas? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and start multiplying.